We said before that there are three types of speed. We studied uniform speed, and then we studied non-uniform speed, and under it average speed 2, which is part of the non-uniform speed. Can you tell me the difference between the uniform and the non-uniform speed? Yes, uniform speed means covering equal distance in equal periods of time. Equal distance in equal periods of time. And V1 equal V2 equal V3 equal V4 and so on. While in non-uniform speed, V1 not equal to V2, not equal to V3, and so on. The definition of the non-uniform speed is covering equal distance in unequal periods of time, or covering unequal distance in equal periods of time. But at the end, I have different speeds in the whole journey. While the uniform speed, I have equal speeds in the whole journey. The last type of speed, which is number 3, it's called the relative speed. What's meant by relative speed? This is what I will study in this video. Okay, let me start now. The relative speed. Let me now start the relative speed. Relative speed is the speed of the moving object relative to an observer. Relative to an observer. What's meant by this? It means that this speed is not the actual speed. It's not the actual speed of the moving object, but it's the speed relative to an observer. يعني it's the speed as the observer see it. Okay? Right. What's meant by this? If you are traveling from مثلا Alexandria to Hurghada or Sharm el-Sheikh and so on, when you are on the road, on the way, you see that the cars on the opposite way are moving very, very, very fast. They are like flying in front of you or beside you. But why is that? It's because the laws of the relative speed that I will know it now. So this relative speed you always see during the traveling. Okay, right. Let me tell you that you have 4 cases in the relative speed. You have 4 cases. Case number 1, if the observer is at rest. يعني the observer is the police officer and he is standing on the pavement and looking at the cars. What he will see? He will see that the relative speed of any car is equal to the actual speed. يعني he will see the real speeds of any car moving in front of him. The police officer, when he is standing on the pavement, يعني at rest, he is not moving at all, he will find that the relative speed that he is seeing is the same as the actual speed of the car. So in this case, relative speed equal to actual speed if the observer is at rest. طيب, case number 2 is divided into 2 cases, okay? So I will divide them into 2. Number 2, if observer is moving, if the observer is moving in same direction. Yani if the police officer was riding in the car and the car is moving in the same direction with the car that he wants to calculate the relative speed. Let's see an example. If the car moving by a speed 60 km/h, this is the car Okay, this is the actual speed, and the observer is riding also in a car, and the car is moving by speed 40 kilometers per hour. So what's the relative speed here? يعني what's the speed of car A according to or relative to the observer in car B? The actual speed of car A, the actual speed of car A is 60 kilometers per hour. طيب what's the relative speed of car A relative to an observer in car B? They are moving in the same direction, but different, of course, speeds. Okay, let us calculate this. Relative speed equal V2 minus V1. V2 minus V1. But which one is V2 and which one is V1? V2 is the biggest and V1 is the smallest. Always, because the speed has to be positive. Okay? It cannot be it cannot be negative. So I have to put V2 is the largest speed and V1 is the smallest speed. So the relative speed relative to an observer will be, do you think, higher or lower than the actual speed? 60 minus 40, it will equal to the relative speed. 60 minus 40 will equal to 20 kilometers per hour. This means that the relative speed of car A relative to an observer in car B was 20 kilometers per hour, while the actual speed was 60 kilometers per hour. This means here that the relative speed is lower than the actual speed. Why? Because they are moving in the same direction. When you look at a car moving beside you in the same direction, you will see it as it moving slower than the real speed or than the actual speed. This is the relative speed number 2. So let me write the law. In this case, when the observer is moving in the same direction, the relative speed equal to V2 minus V1. يعني relative speed lower than actual speed. So this is law number 2. يعني case number 1, if the observer is not moving or at rest, relative speed equal to actual speed. While if the observer is moving but in the same direction, the relative speed will be lower than the actual speed. It will equal V2 minus V1. Let's now go to case number 3. If the observer is moving also but in opposite direction. In this case, the relative speed will be higher than the actual speed. طب let's see an example. If the car A was moving in this direction 60 kilometers per hour, while the observer in car B was moving in the other direction 40 kilometers per hour. In this case, this was the actual speed and this was the speed of the observer. Okay? How can I calculate the relative speed? The relative speed here, the relative speed will equal to V2 plus V1. يعني when you see a car in the opposite direction, as I said in the beginning, you will see that the car is flying. It's very high speed. It's moving at very high speed. Maybe this is not the real speed that it's moving at, but you will see it like this. Why? Because of this law. Relative speed equal v2 plus v1 يعني equal 60 plus 40 يعني equal 100 kilometer per hour. 100 kilometer per hour, this is the relative speed. Is this speed higher or lower than the actual speed? No, it's higher than the actual speed. So the relative speed in this case, when the observer is moving in opposite direction, it will be higher than the actual speed and it will equal v2 plus v1. Let's write the law. If the observer is moving in opposite direction, relative speed equal v2 plus v1, and relative speed is higher than or bigger than the actual speed. Okay, this is case number 3, not 2, sorry. This is case number 3. يبقى عندنا case number 1, if the observer is at rest, relative speed equal to actual speed. Case number 2, if the observer is moving in same direction, relative speed lower than actual speed. Number 3, if the observer is moving in opposite direction, relative speed will be higher than the actual speed. And the law is v2 plus v1. Right, let's see case number 4. Let's see case number 4. If the observer is moving in same direction, but with same speed, يعني in this case the observer is riding in a car which is moving in the same direction. يعني this is car A, okay, it's moving in this direction by 60 km per hour, okay, and the observer, car B, is moving in the same direction also by 60 km per hour also. يعني same speed with same direction. طيب, from case number 2, we knew that when the observer is moving in the same direction, the relative speed equal, yes, v2 minus v1. v2 minus v1. طيب, in this case, relative speed equal v2 minus v1. يعني 60 minus 60, which means 0. What's the meaning of this? What's the meaning of the relative speed equal 0? This means that when the two cars are moving beside each other and both of them are moving with the same speed, I will see the observer in one car will see that the other car is not moving. It's at rest. It's stopping. It's not moving. Why? Because it's moving in the same direction and the same speed. So the car will appear as it is stopped or it is at rest. Okay? So in this case number 4, observer moving in the same direction but with same speed, relative speed equal 0. Relative speed equal 0. All the time. This is a rule. يعني number 1, relative speed equal actual speed. Number 2, relative speed equal v2 minus v1. Number 3, relative speed equal v2 plus v1. Number 4, case number 4, relative speed equal 0. This is the 4 cases of the relative speed. Let's sum up now what we studied in this video. We studied the third type of speed, which is the relative speed. It's the speed of moving object relative to the observer. The relative speed depends on 2 things: position of the observer and the direction relative to motion. لو observer at rest يعني standing on the pavement for example, the relative speed would equal to the actual speed. This is the first case. The second case, لو observer is moving in the same direction, relative speed will be lower than the actual speed and it equal V2 minus V1. And if the observer is moving in opposite direction, relative speed will be higher than the actual speed. It would equal to V2 plus V1. And the last case, if both of the object and observer moving with the same speed in the same direction, the relative speed will equal to 0. Okay? Give reason the moving car seems stable to an observer moving with the same speed in the same direction. Why? Because we knew that when it's in the same direction, the relative speed equal V2 minus V1. And V2 equal V1, so V2 minus V1 will equal to 0. Okay? And what's meant by the relative speed of a moving object equal its real speed? This means that the observer is not moving. The observer is standing, is at rest. Okay? And what's meant by the relative speed of an object moving at 40 to an observer equals 60. يعني الobject was moving at 40 km per hour. This was the actual, and the observer saw it 60 km per hour. This means that the relative speed was higher than the actual speed. This means that the observer was moving in an opposite direction. By speed, how much? Yes, 60 minus 40, which is 20 km per hour. This means that's why he saw the relative speed V2 plus V1, so he saw it 40 plus 20, he saw it 60 km per hour. Okay, now we finished the relative speed and we finished lesson 1, and next video inshallah we'll talk about the lesson 2 graphical representation of moving in straight line. Thank you middle 3, see you next video.